Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the plexi of the lower extremity, which will be from both the lumbar as well as the sacral plexus. So we'll start off by looking at the lumbar plexus, which is the lower back region. So we haven't learned about the vertebrae yet, but if you know what lumbar means, like lumbar support, lumbar pain, like that's going to be the lower back. So this is going to be along the vertebrae, which will be the bottom 5 vertebrae before you get to the sacrum, which is L1 to L5. And then there was going to be nerves that are going to be associated with those. So the lumbar plexus, just to be clear, is going to not include all of those L1s, but it's going to include one contribution from T12, at least a little bit, but then the rest of the lumbar plexus will actually be L1 to L4. So L5 to some extent will be present, but for the most part, it's going to be part of the sacral plexus. So we'll kind of see how that like comes together, but for the most part, the lumbar plexus, it is going to be along those lumbar vertebrae, which you can see here, and that is going to be with L1 to L4 nerves, as well as a little bit of T12. So when we look at the lumbar plexus, a muscle that is going to be really helpful for orienting yourself to like a lot of these different nerves is going to be the psoas major. So if you recall, the psoas major is actually connected to each of the lumbar vertebrae. So you can see it connecting to the transverse processes and then also the intervertebral discs and maybe even a little bit of the vertebral body. But this right here, this relatively kind of long, large muscle, this is the psoas major. And just to review, you can see that it goes like from those lumbar vertebrae across the hip region and then connecting to the femur to allow it to do a lot of hip actions as well as like, for instance, hip flexion. Now, relative to the psoas major, you can see that there are a bunch of these nerves that are coming out from the sides as well as down into the femoral region. These are parts of the lumbar plexus. And you can see those here, as well as down here, and we'll include basically all of these. So a couple of words to at least become familiar with. Ilio. So remember, ilio is referring to like ilium, and that's going to be the bone right up here. You can see the iliac crest, and at the very least, it'll be relative to that, or at least referring to that to some extent. But then you also have femoral. So femoral is where you like remember the femur bone. The femur is going to be down here. And when you hear the word femoral, you should probably be thinking of the thigh in some way, which includes like femoral nerve itself. That's going to be going to a lot of your quadriceps muscles. And then lateral femoral cutaneous nerve, lateral femoral. So that's actually coming out from like the side of the femur. And then cutaneous, like cutaneous means the skin. So this will be a relatively superficial nerve, and it's going to be on the lateral femoral side. So you kind of see how we're looking at this, but lastly, just for the last two as well, obturator nerve. I mean, there's one big thing that we talked about with obturator in the name, which is obturator foramen, which had the obturator membrane, obturator internus, and obturator externus relative to it. And then lastly, lumbosacral. That is actually where we get a connection between the lumbar plexus and the sacral plexus. And we'll kind of see how that comes to play in a little bit later. So to get started, you can see those nerves relatively plainly, but here you have the psoas major and psoas minor on top, and then a cut. Psoas major over here. But then you can see that there are some nerves that come out from the sides of the psoas major. There are some nerves along the back of the psoas major. And then there are some nerves that are kind of medial to the psoas major as well. So depending on where you are relative to the psoas major, it's going to be helpful to try and use that as a landmark to figure out where you are and what you're looking at. So to get started with our first nerve, we have the iliohypogastric nerve. So we're going to kind of go to some extent in order, like down the roots. So the iliohypogastric nerve, you can see all the way up here. This is going to have contributions from T12, but mostly from L1. So you can see that you have this kind of like relatively large part, this root right over here. And then the root has two branches. The top one is iliohypogastric. So ilio is referring to the fact that it's going to be going down towards the ilium, but hypogastric. So gastric is something that we haven't really introduced yet, but if you have heard of the word like gastric juices, do you know what that's referring to? It's referring to the stomach. So hypogastric, kind of like hypo under, hypothermia, hypogastric means it's below the stomach. So this actually is somewhat high up, coming out lateral to the psoas major, and the top branch is going to be the iliohypogastric nerve. So the iliohypogastric nerve is going to be actually going into like the abdominal region. So it will go to the transversus abdominis as well as the internal abdominal obliques, which are two of the layers of your lateral abdominal muscles. And then it's also going to go to some regions along the pelvis as well for sensory. So it'll go over the skin along the iliac crest. So that's where the ilio is. It's going towards the ilium. But then it's also going to go along the posterior gluteal region as well as the suprapubic regions. So kind of like above the pubic regions as well as along the top back sides of the gluteal region. So here, this would probably be good to point at. You can see the iliohypogastric nerve. It goes along kind of the top of the ilium. It goes towards like the top and front of the pubis, and then along the side and back of the gluteal region. So iliohypogastric, one of the highest ones, coming off of T12 and L1. Now, the next one that we have here is called ilioinguinal nerve. Now, this is actually a nerve coming off of the same root. You can see T12L1 has this root coming off of it, and here's iliohypogastric. Here's ilioinguinal coming off right underneath. So ilioinguinal nerve, this one is still relatively high up, but it's just like right underneath. So ilioinguinal. Now, once again, ilio means that it's going towards like the ilium region, but in this case, it's actually going to go through the inguinal canal, which is traveling through the inguinal ligament. So if you recall, you have a ligament that goes from like the anterior superior iliac spine towards the pubis, and that band is going to have a space inside of it. That space is the inguinal canal. And the ilioinguinal nerve will go through that canal, and then it'll go to like the inguinal region. So inguinal means kind of like groin region. So it's going to go towards, well, you can see right over here, the anterior medial thigh, as well as the anterior pubic region, which is what we usually call the groin. So it'll go to some extent like the mons pubis, the anterior scrotum, or analogously like the labia majus or labia majora. So you can see that region right over here with the ilioinguinal nerve. So just to kind of back up, here you can see kind of like a branching of two nerves right here. Well, you can see them named as well. It's traveling behind the psoas major, and then you have iliohypogastric and ilioinguinal nerve coming off of it. Now, the next nerve that we have here, we're going slightly downward in the roots. It is the genitofemoral nerve. So, genitofemoral nerve. Genito refers to like genital region. Femoral refers to femoral region. So, in fact, there is two branches of the genitofemoral nerve, which is the femoral and the genital branch. So, if you look closely, the genitofemoral nerve is actually going to kind of travel through the psoas major. So you can see the psoas major here again. Genitofemoral kind of pierces through, coming out along the front of the psoas major, and then it kind of travels down the front of the psoas major as it goes to its terminal regions, well, as it branches out to the femoral and the genital branch. So this is going to go into the femoral region will go to the front of the femur, kind of like the front of the femoral region, and then the genital branch will go to, once again, the scrotum and the labia majora. So you can see those two branches here, femoral and then genital. Those are coming off of genitofemoral, but to back it up really quickly, here you can see the genitofemoral nerve right over here, which is going to go to the front of the femur, as well as a little bit of like the genital region, very similarly to the ilioinguinal nerve. So there is one motor thing that the genitofemoral nerve will actually be responsible for, though, which is the cremaster muscle. Now that's kind of an odd muscle. Like it is going to be a muscle that is only found in men because it is in the scrotum. So the cremaster muscle is going to be responsible for thermoregulation, or to basically what's the word? Well, elevate and depress the testes. As in, like, the scrotum is going to have a muscle in it, and it could either raise or lower the testes depending on the body heat. As in, like, if the testes get too hot, they drop down. If the testes get too cold, they go back up towards the body. So genitofemoral has a genital branch and a femoral branch, and those are going to be innervating either like the front of the femur or, once again, genital regions of the genital region, which will be like the anterior scrotum and the labia majora. So if you look closely, like you can see those regions again. So hypo or iliohypogastric, that's going kind of along the top of the ilium towards the front top portion of the pubic region, as well as the back lateral portion of the gluteal region. Ilioinguinal nerve is going to be going along the, well, inguinal region, which is like the groin region, as well as to the labia majora and the scrotum. Similarly, the genitofemoral also goes to that with its genital branch, but also the front of the femur over here as well. And you can see some of those nerves in here as well, where you can see the femoral branch of the genitofemoral nerve right over here, kind of along with your femoral artery and vein. Now, our next nerve that we have here is called the lateral femoral cutaneous nerve. So let's think about that for a sec. Like, what does that name tell you? Lateral femoral cutaneous nerve. So cutaneous nerve indicates that it's like one that is for sensory information found in the skin, but lateral femoral means that it's on the lateral side of the thigh. So you can see that lateral femoral nerve is kind of like going one step down from what we were talking about with genitofemoral, which was L1 and L2. Lateral femoral cutaneous nerve will be L2 and L3. So L2 and L3, right here and here, you can see the lateral femoral cutaneous nerve, which is going to be right here, L2 and L3. Now this is going to be going to the lateral side of the thigh, but it is going to have like at least a somewhat specific pathway, as in it's going to be traveling towards the anterior superior iliac spine. So kind of right over here, you can see it traveling under the anterior superior iliac spine. And let me just blow that up a little bit. So over here, this is the lateral femoral cutaneous nerve. It's traveling laterally, as you just expect, going under the inguinal ligament, right near the anterior superior iliac spine. But it's then going to travel slightly downward, about 10 centimeters, and then it's going to be coming out kind of right below or a little bit below the anterior superior iliac spine. So it goes under the inguinal ligament up here, but then it travels downward a little bit where it then comes out and becomes superficial. So this is one that we are going to hopefully find in the cadavers, but this is going to be coming out from like the fascia a little bit in an odd spot, but we'll be able to use the anterior superior iliac spine as a good landmark and indicator. Now that brings us next to the femoral nerve. And the femoral nerve, once again, one step down, and we have, in this case, L2 to L4. So L2 to L4, those are going to be 2, 3, and 4, and you can see the femoral nerve right over here. So far, like it's been kind of like 1 or 2 nerves, but now L2 to L4 is 3 nerves, or 3 roots, sorry. But you can see the femoral nerve right over here, and this is going to be innervating quite a few things. So, in fact, like there are some branches of the femoral nerve, which will be both muscular and cutaneous, or sensory and motor. But if you look closely, like we have the anterior cutaneous nerve. This is going to be going to branch out to 2 more nerves, the medial and intermediate femoral cutaneous nerves. So medial and intermediate cutaneous nerves of the thigh, those are going to be going to kind of like the anterior and then the medial regions of the thigh. So I'll bring up a picture in just a sec, but we also have the saphenous nerve, which we'll elaborate more on later because it's actually going to go down to the leg region. But then you have a lot of muscular branches as well. Like if you recall from the muscle lecture, the femoral nerve is actually going to be innervating basically the whole anterior compartment. So all of the quadriceps, the articularis genu, as well as the sartorius, are going to be innervated by the femoral nerve. And there's just maybe one branch that we're going to look for on the cadaver, which was the nerve to the VMO, or nerve to the vastus medialis obliquus. But we will be able to see a bunch of branches of the femoral nerve, and hopefully we'll be able to see some of these cutaneous nerves as well. But at the very least, you should be able to see that the nerves goes down the front of the thigh. It will come out from under the inguinal ligament, very close to the femoral artery and vein. And then it's going to travel and go into the quadriceps to the sartorius. And then it's going to travel medially to go along the medial side of the knee and leg to continue as the saphenous nerve. So I keep bringing that up, but let's just look at this picture really quickly. So if you look closely, this right here with like this big array of branches, this is the femoral nerve. And the femoral nerve you can see is very close to the femoral artery and vein. This is going to be one of the big things that you look for, like in the femoral triangle. So the femoral nerve is the big nerve that you'll see not connected to, but around femoral artery and vein. And if you recall, we have like a short acronym for this, which is NAV. And then you can see vein, artery, and nerve all in a line. But to continue looking at this nerve, you can see that the femoral nerve has a bunch of branches. And at the very least, you can see a bunch of these branches going out into the different muscles. But then there's one, like kind of like major branch that you can see and continue to follow here. You'll have a branch that goes to like the vastus medialis. That's going to be the nerve to the VMO. But this one right here is going to continue as the saphenous nerve. So the saphenous nerve is going to continue down, and then it's actually going to go down into like the medial side of the leg and knee. And then hopefully you can see that that will make sense regarding like our sensory picture. So here you can see the femoral nerve, and this right here is where you can see the medial and intermediate femoral cutaneous nerves. So medial and intermediate femoral cutaneous nerve is going to be going along the anterior medial side of the femur, and then the saphenous nerve will continue to go down to the medial side of the leg. So the femoral nerve will have the anterior branch, which has the medial and intermediate branches, which then go to the femur, kind of on the anterior and medial side, and then the saphenous nerve, which is a branch of femoral nerve, continuing down to the medial side of the leg. One more time. You can see that over here. So here is your femoral nerve. You can see it going to a bunch of your muscles, and then saphenous nerve, the one, or well, actually here, you can also see the nerve to the VMO, and then the saphenous nerve is going to travel with femoral artery and vein, but then it's going to kind of come out and then go along the medial side of the knee and to the medial and posterior side of the leg. So you can see all that blue, that's going to be the femoral nerve. Well, femoral nerve and its branches. Now, the next nerve that we have here is the obturator nerve. And we've been using obturator nerve, or we've been using obturator quite a few times, so hopefully it kind of comes back. But obturator, always try to remember you have that obturator foramen, that hole in like the bottom of the coxal bone. The obturator nerve is going to be traveling through the obturator membrane in the obturator foramen. So traveling slightly downward again, well, actually, no, kind of at the same levels as the femoral nerve, L2, L3, L4, that is the obturator nerve. And this is part of like the medial nerves now. So in this case, obturator nerve is going to go to the medial muscles of the thigh. So if it's going to the medial muscles of the thigh, do you remember what major action those do? Those are your adductors. So obturator nerve is largely going to go to your adductors, ADD, D as in dog, but then it is actually going to have some, well, adductors will have some innervations by other nerves, but mostly obturator nerve. So once again, here's your psoas major, and then it's actually going to kind of come out from behind the psoas major, and then you can see it traveling downward right over here along the medial side of the psoas major. So this is the obturator nerve. Oh no, sorry. This is lumbosacral. This is the obturator nerve, which would be traveling directly behind the psoas major. And then running along the medial side of the psoas major, you can see it traveling downward and then going through the obturator foramen, and that's going to be going to your adductors. So muscles like pectineus, adductor longus, adductor brevis, adductor magnus, like your adductors will mostly be innervated by obturator nerve. So you'll be able to see that traveling behind, well, actually, it's going to be hard, but it's going to travel behind psoas major. It's going to travel along the medial side of psoas major. It'll travel through the obturator foramen. And then I'll just kind of like give you a heads up. We actually will potentially be able to find this, which will be kind of sandwiched between adductor magnus and adductor brevis. Like it's going to be a little bit tough, but you should be able to see it kind of between those two muscles. So it's going to innervate most of the adductors, but it will also have a sensory function as well, going to the very middle medial part of the thigh. So if I do go back, you can see obturator nerve right over here, right along the middle of the medial side of the thigh. Oh, it's gone to the next slide. Here you go. Here is the middle of the medial side of the thigh. That's where the obturator nerve is going to be innervating. Now, lastly, for our lumbar plexus, we have the lumbosacral trunk, which is actually going to be a connection from lumbar plexus down to the sacral plexus, where L4 and L5 is going to contribute to the nerves of the sacral plexus. So some people actually do kind of like combine the two plexi together, but in this case, you can see lumbosacral trunk. Well, actually, we're just going to see it like separate as the lumbar plexus up here, and then the sacral plexus further down. So L4 and L5 is actually going to continue down and help with contributing to the sacral plexus. So here's like a review slide. I mean, try to use the psoas major as a good indicator of where you're at. Look at the different branches and then try to figure out where you're at or like which nerve is which. So I'm going to let you try and do this on your own, but let me know if you have questions or issues. But let's go ahead and move on to the next part of the lecture, which is going to be on the sacral plexus. So for the sacral plexus, like you do have like a number of nerves, but if you look closely, a lot of them, once again, is very familiar to like things that you might already know. So in the face, or in looking at the word gluteal, like you know what gluteus means? This means that it's the posterior hip region. So superior and inferior gluteal nerves, those will be going to mostly your gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus, which luckily kind of coincides and makes sense. Now the words piriformis, obturator internus, and quadratus femoris, those should also be somewhat familiar because those are muscles that you learned in the deep gluteal region. So far, kind of like banking on stuff that we've already learned, but then you also have posterior femoral cutaneous nerve. So guess where that's going to be found? The back of the femoral region. And cutaneous being super of the skin is going to be a superficial nerve. But then lastly, we have a few new things. So these two you actually might be familiar with, but this one might be a little bit new. So tibial and common fibular nerve, we haven't gotten down to the leg quite yet, but these two are basically your two leg bones. So similar to how you had like radius and ulna, you have tibia and fibula in your leg instead. So the tibial nerve will be the more medial nerve, the bigger of the two, and the common fibular nerve will be the smaller and more lateral of the two. So like the nerve and the bones will be kind of like the same, tibial being medial and bigger, common fibular nerve being lateral and smaller. And then pudendal. Pudendal is actually going to refer to like the groin region again, or like the reproductive region. So we'll take a look at that when we get to it. So let's go ahead and like take a look at the sacral plexus a little bit. So when we say the words like sacral plexus, like primarily you'll probably think of the sacrum, which has 4 different nerves, which are going through the 4 different levels of sacral foramina, which is going to be S1 to S4. So sacral plexus will mostly be composed of S1 to S4, but with the connection to the lumbar plexus, it also has L4 and L5 contributing to it. So in total, it actually can have contributions from L4, L5, S1, S2, S3, and S4. So when you look at the sacral plexus, keep in mind that you have all the way up from L4 and then all the way down to S4 down here. So S5, we don't really look at too much. It's not like a major root. These are the major roots. Now, when we look at the sacral plexus, there's actually going to be kind of like at least one major division. Like in contrast to the brachial plexus, we haven't actually talked too much about like divisions and interconnections. It's mostly been kind of like branches off of the roots. But in this case, we do have at least one kind of division here, which is between the anterior division, which is going to be going to like the posterior compartment, as well as the back and bottom of the foot. Or sorry, the anterior compartment, which goes to the posterior, wait, okay, yes, I think I said that. Anterior compartment, which goes to the posterior compartments of the leg, thigh, and then bottom or plantar part of the foot. And then the posterior compartment, which is kind of posterior lateral actually, it's going to be going to the like the very superficial posterior muscles, as in like more posterior, as in like more dorsal, which will be like the actual kind of like gluteal muscles. But then it's also going to be going to the anterior and lateral side of the leg and dorsal side of the foot. So you have two kind of major divisions, the anterior and posterior, and that will also divide up like the muscles of the thigh as well. So something that I like to think about, like when I think about these two divisions, is that we already talked about muscles on the anterior and medial side. Like those innervations are almost kind of set already. But when we're talking about the sacral plexus, we're talking about either posterior or more posterior. So the anterior division is like less posterior, and then the posterior division is more posterior. So I'll try and explain that when we get to it, but let's go ahead and go on to the sciatic nerve. So the sciatic nerve is actually the largest and thickest kind of like nerve of the body. So nerve, like excluding like brain and spinal cord, the sciatic nerve is one of the thickest. And it's kind of a nerve in a way that it's going to have like neurons traveling through it, but it actually is going to be a kind of combination of two nerves within it. So the sciatic nerve is actually going to be composed of the tibial nerve and the common fibular nerve together. And in that case, like we actually might see them kind of separated at different levels. Like typically, at least, the sciatic nerve is going to be together and then it's going to travel down the back of the thigh. And then near the popliteal region, it will branch out to the tibial and common fibular nerves, respectively. But in some people, it actually is almost completely divided all the way up here already. So just depending on the person, it might be a little bit different, but technically it's like the sciatic nerve, but you could see tibial and common fibular nerve anywhere from like all the way up in the gluteal region, all the way down to like near the popliteal region. So sciatic nerve, though, is the big nerve in the back of the thigh. This is the one that's going to be coming out from the under the piriformis, and then it's going to travel along the back, kind of between the heads, or sorry, between the muscles of the hamstrings, and then it's going to go into the back of the knee region, which, if you haven't guessed, is called the popliteal region. And that's where you find the popliteal fossa, which is where you'll actually see those two branches, the tibial nerve and common fibular nerve. So to take a look at the tibial nerve is going to be coming from the anterior division. So here, let's just go to the beginning real quick. The tibial nerve is actually this half of the sciatic nerve. So it has all of these connections over here. So almost everything, the tibial nerve will come from L4, L5, S1, S2, and S3. So tibial nerve is from the anterior division, and it is going to be innervating everything along the posterior side of the thigh and then the posterior side of the leg as well. So we haven't learned the leg muscles quite yet, but here you can see the posterior compartment of the thigh, which includes long-headed biceps femoris. You have the semimembranosus and semitendinosus. So tibial nerve innervating most of the posterior compartment. I mean, barring like the short head of the biceps femoris. Now, as we'll see, it's going to go down into the leg as well. So don't worry about these quite yet. We'll talk about them, but you have like the calf muscles, gastrocnemius, soleus, plantaris, as well as the deep posterior compartment, which will include the flexor digitorum longus, flexor hallucis longus, tibialis posterior, popliteus, and so on. And then even the foot will have innervations with the tibial nerve as well, which is going to be along the plantar side, meaning like the sole of the foot. So it's going to have a lot of like innervations of muscles, like going along the back of the thigh and then branching out like through the back of the leg. You can see the tibial nerve is a pretty large nerve running somewhat centrally along the posterior leg, and then it's going to branch out into the foot to go into muscle down here as well. But some of those branches actually will also be cutaneous or sensory, which is where you'll find the plantar nerves, the medial, and the lateral plantar nerves, respectively. So the tibial nerve you can see running along the medial side of the ankle, and then it's going to branch out to those plantar nerves underneath the foot. So tibial nerve, that was this part over here, and that's going along the back of the leg, back of the thigh, and then plantar side of the foot. But next, we have the common fibular nerve. And common fibular nerve is going to be named because there will be branches of the fibular nerve, but we'll talk about those later. But the common fibular nerve is going to come from the roots L4, L5, S1, and S2. So kind of not similar, but a lot of overlap just because there's a lot of them. But tibial nerve started from L4, L5, S1, S2. Common fibular nerve is L4, L5, S1, and S2. Oh, sorry, tibial nerve is S3 as well. But the common fibular nerve, so common fibular nerve is actually the other side of the sciatic nerve. So here is tibial nerve. This part is common fibular nerve. And you can see that it goes to most of the same things as tibial nerve, but then it goes only down to S2. But being that it's still part of the sciatic nerve, it'll be traveling kind of like along the same path. It comes out from under the piriformis. It goes along the back of the thigh. But then as you get to the popliteal fossa, the tibial nerve goes down through the popliteal fossa. The common fibular nerve comes out and travels along the side of the knee. So it's actually going to travel along the side of the knee, the lateral side of the knee, to go to the lateral and then anterior side of the leg. So as it travels down, the common fibular nerve will come out of the popliteal fossa. It will travel along the fibularis longus, and then under the fibularis longus, it's going to branch out to two nerves, the superficial and deep branches of the fibula, or superficial fibular nerve, and then deep fibular nerve. So, being that it's going to be going along the lateral and deep side of the leg, lateral and anterior side of the leg, it is going to go to mostly like the lateral muscles and the anterior muscles. So fibularis longus, fibularis brevis, as well as the extensors of the leg, and then the dorsal side of the foot as well. But there is one muscle that the common fibular nerve does have an innervation for in the thigh region, which is the biceps femoris short head. So basically everything else, like that was the tibial nerve, but the biceps femoris short head is the exception here, where it's going to be innervated by the common fibular nerve. So this is going to be mostly for like the lateral and anterior side of the leg, but it will also innervate the dorsal side of the foot to some extent and have sensory innervations along the way as well. So along the anterior lateral leg as well as the dorsum of the foot. Now, the next nerves that we have here are going to be part of the posterior division, which is like the far posterior division, like posterior, like very posterior. What are the most posterior muscles of the gluteal region? It's like the gluteus muscles. So gluteus maximus, gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus. Those are going to be the gluteal muscles, but superior gluteal nerve specifically goes to gluteus medius and minimus, as well as tensor fascia lata. So the good way to find superior gluteal nerve is that it's going to be coming out from above the piriformis. So, okay, now we need to find the piriformis. So a good way to find the piriformis is to look for the sciatic nerve. So here's the sciatic nerve. It's either going to come out from under or through the piriformis, which means that the piriformis is very clearly found right here. And then right above it, you can see a nerve coming out from it. This is the superior gluteal nerve. So the superior gluteal nerve is going to be innervating the gluteus medius as well as the gluteus minimus, and then also the tensor fascia lata. And then as we'll see, like when we do the dissections, you'll see that the superior gluteal artery and vein should be traveling along with it. Now the inferior gluteal nerve, guess where you find that? Like still in the same region, and in this case, using the piriformis again, it is under the piriformis. So the inferior gluteal nerve comes out from under the piriformis, and you can see that right over here, and that's going to be going to the gluteus maximus. So gluteus maximus, that is going to be innervated by inferior gluteal nerve, and it's going to be coming out from under the piriformis. But be careful because there will actually be some other stuff coming out of here as well, but those will be going a little bit more inferiorly. So let's go ahead and go to those as well. So oh shoot, I haven't been talking about roots, but superior gluteal nerve is going to have contributions from L4, L5, and S1. So superior gluteal nerve, you'll be able to see like coming from L4, L5, S1, right over here. Inferior gluteal nerve is going to be right underneath it. And then nerve to piriformis is the one kind of like right in the same line. This is going to be coming out at the very bottom. So all three of these are parts of the posterior division, which are going to be parts of like, well, parts of these on along the back, kind of along with like common fibular nerve. And piriformis or nerve to piriformis is this bottom last one. So nerve to piriformis is going to have roots from S1 to S2, and this is going to be going to the deep side of the piriformis. So for the most part, you actually won't really see this very well, but this is going to be like going to be on the inside of piriformis. So here's your piriformis muscle, and then you would have your nerve to piriformis going to it. I don't think this one shows it that well, actually, but yeah, and you would have your nerve to piriformis going to like the inside of the piriformis. So nerve to piriformis coming like from S1 and S2 goes to the piriformis on the inside of the pelvis in this case. Now you also have another nerve, which is luckily named for the muscle it goes to, which is nerve to quadratus femoris. So nerve to quadratus femoris, guess where that's going? It's going to quadratus femoris, but it is also actually going to be innervating the muscle right above it as well. So it's going to go to the quadratus femoris, but then it's also going to go to the inferior gemellus as well. So looks like you've got that right here, which is nerve to quadratus femoris, as well as inferior gemellus right above it. So you can see that coming off of the anterior division at L4, L5, and S1. So nerve to quadratus femoris right here. And then you also have another named nerve going to a muscle, which is nerve to obturator internus. So nerve to obturator internus, luckily, like once again, based off of its name, goes to obturator internus, but it also goes to a muscle right above it as well. So it goes to obturator internus, but then it also goes to the superior gemellus as well. So obturator internus, or nerve to obturator internus, goes to obturator internus and superior gemellus. And you can see that one right here, kind of like right below the nerve to quadratus femoris. So nerve to quadratus femoris was L4, L5, S1. Nerve to obturator internus was L5, S1, S2. Now, pudendal nerve. So pudendal nerve is one word that we actually haven't really used and don't really use very often. But pudendal basically means to like the genitalia region. And that's exactly where you find it going. So nerve to, or pudendal nerve, you'll be able to see internally, it's going to be coming out right over here. But then you actually do see a little bit of it over here as well. So it's going to be coming out. Oh, shoot. So it's going to be coming out from under the piriformis region as well. But then it's going to go kind of under the sacrotuberous ligament and then into the genitalia region. So it's going to be going along the bottom of the piriformis. It's going to be traveling under the sacrospinous ligament or the sacrotuberous ligament, and then it's going to be going kind of inwards to the genital region. And this is actually going to have like a few nerves that are coming off of it, which will be inferior rectal nerve. So rectal means like rectum, and that we may get to when we get to the digestive system, but I'm sure you've heard of the rectum, which is kind of like at the back end of the digestive system, like right before the anus. And then perineal nerve is referring to like a group of muscles that is forming something called the perineum. That's going to be right along the kind of bottom of the pelvic region as well. And then the dorsal nerve of penis or clitoris, that's going to be going to like the penis or clitoris. So a highly sensitive nerve, very important. But this is going to be going to some deep regions of the groin and genitalia. So it's going to be allowing for a lot of different sensations, but also we will have some different motor functions in the perineum, so perineal nerve, and then also external urethral sphincter and external anal sphincter. So these are actually the muscles that you use to kind of control yourself, as in like, sorry, you have you have muscles that will be able to open depending on if there is an urge to go to the bathroom, like pee or poop, but you also have muscles that allow you to hold it. Those are the external urethral sphincter and external anal sphincter. So luckily we've got those nerves. So moving on to our next nerve, we have the posterior femoral nerve, somewhat more familiar terms like posterior femoral, back of the femur. So this is actually also going to be very close to like that back or that region kind of under the piriformis. So right over here, you would be able to see the posterior femoral nerve right next to the sciatic nerve. And posterior femoral nerve is going to be going kind of like down and to the back of the femur and thigh. So it's going to be going to the back of the femur and thigh and along kind of like the posterior inferior gluteal region as well. So you can see that region right over here, right along the bottom of the gluteal region, right along the back of the thigh as well. As its name suggests, posterior femoral cutaneous nerve. Oh, something interesting though is that it's actually coming out from both anterior and posterior divisions, which will be coming from S1, S2, and S3. So once again, try to find these nerves, try to see if you can figure out which one's which, see where the branches are, see what muscles they come off of, and let me know if you have any questions. So with that said, I think that's about it for today. Thank you for listening. Good luck with your studying, and I'll see you all next time.